on today's episode of Parenting Great Kids.
Every behavior we see in a child has purpose and meaning behind it. It's not just to drive us crazy. It's not just to make us annoyed or frustrated.
You know, you and I see people in their 30s and their 40s and their 50s still aching for their parents' approval and connection. And Dad, will you finally say I'm okay and I'm good enough? And that goes on for years and years and years.
And I think our depression and anxiety in our generation for sure stems from that.
Welcome to Parenting Great Kids. Here's your host, Dr. Meg Meeker.
My special guest is Tia Slightman, and we're going to be talking about discipline. Our theme is discipline without drama, raising confident, respectful kids.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
You're a parent, I'm a parent, and now a grandparent. And, you know, it's so hard. I mean, it's so hard. Somebody said to me the other day, my husband's leaving and they have kids at home. And he said, I get to leave and go to work. And I thought, the truth is, for me, it's always been easier going to work than staying at home and tussling with kids. Parenting is like a tug of war. And especially when you've got a child who's strong-willed, you've got a very emotional child. And very often kids, particularly strong-willed kids, just won't listen to you. I have a grandson who every time I say, the sky is blue. No, it's not, it's red. Or I'll say, how old are you? I'm 8. And I'll say, no, you're really 3. If I argue with him that he's 8, it doesn't go anywhere good. Say, oh, okay, so you're 8. And an hour later, how old are you? 5. So, dealing with kids is it's really pretty tough. How much does a child's personality shape the approach that a parent should take with their kids?
Yeah, it's a good question. And all kids are different, but yet they're all very similar. And so parents will often say to me and clients that we work with, well, one of my kids just listens and does everything I want them to do, and one won't, and one's super strong-willed, and nothing works the same for each of them. And unfortunately, that's not actually the case. The same things will work, but what I like to say to parents is some just need a little more consistency and a little more parenting. Mm-hmm. And if I look at my own 2 boys who are now 14 and 16, my youngest, Beckett, always needed just a little more guidance and a little more parenting. And so we want to think about the fact that, every behavior we see in a child has purpose and meaning behind it. It's not just to drive us crazy. It's not just to make us annoyed or frustrated. There's a reason and a purpose. And most of the time as parents, because parenting's a learned skill and it's not intuitive, most of us don't have the skills to really know what that purpose is and why they're pushing back. And because we don't know why, we get very triggered and frustrated thinking that they're just doing it to deliberately be rude or disrespectful when that's not really the case. And so the thing that I really strive for every parent that we come in contact with to learn and to do and to understand is learning those skills to understand the why behind the behavior so you can really support that child so you're not living in that constant game of tug of war.
Mm-hmm. How much does a parent's personality play into discipline issues?
Mm-hmm. I would say a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I would say so much of us are stuck in our own cycles of the way that we were raised, that maybe we want to repeat some of it, maybe we don't. Maybe we like some of our childhood, maybe we didn't like any of our childhood, but because we haven't learned the skills, we end up repeating the way that we were raised. And so it's very triggering. So our child behavior will trigger something in us that we maybe don't like or want to come out, but that's when our inner child really comes out, when we see those behaviors in our kids. And so if we look at our kids' behaviors, what I like to say to parents is the behaviors you see in your child are a direct reflection of your parenting. So we're reinforcing behaviors we don't want to see. We're reinforcing them pushing back constantly. We're reinforcing them to not listen the first time by the things that we do and say, not on purpose by any means. Every parent is trying their best, but we haven't learned how to effectively avoid that cycle. And so when we see something we don't like in our kids, there's something that we can do different. And the one thing that I think parents get stuck doing is trying to force their kids to change, force them to listen, force them to do the right thing, force them to stay in bed, force them to do their homework. And in forcing them, you're creating a battle, which is actually making things worse, not better. Instead of saying, hey, what do I need to do differently? What can I do and say different from what I'm currently doing so that I can shift my child's behavior?
So what I hear you saying really is that if a kid is exhibiting a behavior that bothers you and triggers something in you that happened as a child, you've really got two kids battling it out. You've got the little kid and the parent, and then you've got the little kid who's there in real life, and they're kind of and the parent is responding to the kid in not the healthiest of ways. So can you give me an example of where maybe a discipline issue where a parent is doing the wrong thing with a kid? A lot of times you hear parents say, no, don't do that. No, don't do that. No, don't do that. What kind of things does a parent do that reinforces bad patterns?
Yeah, so many things without realizing it. We do so many things. I can give an example of like the classic case of spilled milk to kind of help showcase when we're doing something that's effective versus ineffective. And so if we look at our parenting styles, there's really like three core parenting styles: that authoritarian, that I like to call the overpowering tiger, where your kids need to listen because you said so. And that's where we get stuck, really punishing more often than not, yelling and reminding and empty threats and taking things away and putting our kids in timeout and overpowering them. And then we have that permissive parent that's really what I call the wet doormat. You want to set boundaries, you want them to follow through, but you don't know how to hold them and you don't know how to follow through. So you end up giving in, giving multiple chances. It feels like your kids are walking all over you and you end up just feeling totally defeated. And then we've got that positive discipline parent, which is the parent who's setting mutual respect boundaries, following through in a respectful way, in a disciplinarian way, not a punishment way. And so if we look at the classic case of spilled milk, everybody's been there. It's the end of the day. You're tired. You're exhausted. The last thing you want to deal with is sour milk gone everywhere. And so the cup spills, the milk goes everywhere at the dinner table, and that overpowering tiger authoritarian parent is going to react to that, feeling very triggered. Most likely, maybe because like when I grew up, if I spilled, my dad was mad at me. I was in trouble if I spilled anything. And I used to be so terrified if I spilled something. And so that parent is most likely feeling that trigger from their childhood, that the milk spills, they get triggered, they feel their nervous system rising, and they will react to it. Something along the lines of, oh, why do you always have to do that every single night? There's always something. Can't you just sit at the table and eat? Why does it always need to end in a mess? Go to your room. I can't even look at you right now.
Yeah. Painful for a child.
Very painful for a child. And in that instance, what we've done is we focused on the child. So the child feels badly. The child feels like they can't do anything wrong. The child feels like they can't please you or they're not loved. When really, as the parent, we're really frustrated by the milk. When you get stuck in those punishment cycles, you focus on the child, which is what creates more unwanted behavior. That child's emotional needs are depleted. That child doesn't know how to meet their goals in life, which is to please you and to push boundaries until they're found. So you end up cycling and cycling. Whereas if a positive disciplined parent were to respond to that situation, it would sound totally different. We would stay focused on the spill and the idea that we want to teach our kids a skill to clean up the mess and do better next time versus focusing on the child and who they are. So it would sound something like, gosh, I see you had a spill. No worries. Even grownups have spills sometime. Would you like to clean that up on your own, or would you like my help? Would you like to use the sponge? Would you like to use the towel? And we're really giving our kids choice and power. We're there to support them. And they do need to be cleaning, and they need to take part in cleaning up the mess, because that's what we want our kids to spill and clean up, not spill and walk away. Our goal as a parent wasn't to make them feel badly about who they were.
So what you're talking about really is parents learning to exercise tremendous self-control, because we can't just go into the spilled milk situation and explode because we've had a bad day, we're mad at our boss, we've only been home for 10 minutes, and this is driving us crazy. And I think that's pretty typical for a lot of parents and kids. kids often get the leftovers, usually get the leftovers of parents because they've had a hard day. The first time they really see their kids are spending any time is around dinner time or an hour after, whatever. And it's the worst time of day for a parent to really interact with their kid because they're exhausted and the kid is exhausted and they're both irritable. And so, from what you're saying, I hear that you're saying that, parents really need to think situations through and exercise a lot of self-control. Let's talk about firm versus flexible. Now, how do parents balance the firmness while still giving their kids choices to express themselves? Because I often see this balance tipped, honestly, in my practice with a lot of parents and their kids. So talk about the difference between being firm and being flexible without going too far to one side or the other, the authoritarian or the permissive.
Yeah. So we use a term that I created known as 3 C's boundaries. And because all kids are born with those predetermined jobs to please you, which is great, but the second job being contradictory to push boundaries until boundaries are found, that if you are what we call gray in our boundaries, sometimes you give in, sometimes you don't, sometimes you're mad, sometimes you're not, sometimes you explode when they spill, sometimes you're calm, sometimes you say they can, watch 5 more minutes of TV, then sometimes you're like, no. If we're all over the map, we're very inconsistent and we're gray in our boundaries. If our boundaries are gray, our kids are doing an A plus 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 job to push and push and push until they're found. And so we have to learn the skills to set what we call 3 C's boundaries: concrete, clear, and consistent. And so as much as we don't want to be rigid in our parenting and we're not drill sergeants just drilling our kids around. We don't want to be so flexible that we're going gray. And that's what parents really need to focus on. Are you going gray because you're tired and you don't want to deal with it? Or are you consistent in your boundaries while still giving your kids choice in that? So for example, you have your consistent morning routine, no matter the age of your child, and and they know that they need to wake up and they need to make their bed, they need to get dressed, they need to have breakfast, they need to brush their teeth and put their water bottle and lunch in their backpack. So let's say that's your morning routine. Our flexibility is not some days we don't have them make our bed because they didn't and we let them skip it. And some days we pack their lunch and some days that's very confusing. Our flexibility comes in, hey, do you think you need 20 or 25 minutes to go through these routines? Let's practice and see. Hey, would you like to do TV or video games when you complete your morning routine? How much time do you think you need for the morning routine? How much time do we need until we go? So we can involve our kids in the process and we can be flexible in terms of the order, or we can be flexible in the time that they might need, but we're not going to be so flexible that we're going gray in our boundaries, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Or not even gray, but I see a number of parents have no boundaries. And the philosophy is, I want my child to choose everything from the time they're 2 to 5 to 22. And the child, what I often tell parents, I'd like you to weigh in on it too, is when you have a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old and you tell them to choose everything, it's terrifying because they can't figure it out. They don't know what you're saying. Their minds are not developed enough to be able to make a choice. And sometimes they don't want a choice. They just want to live in their ecosystem that parents have made safe. For instance, I'd love to see how you handle this. I had a little girl that was in kindergarten come in for kindergarten checkup. Dad's standing behind me. I started talking to her, asking her questions. She'd answer. And I asked another question, and her dad from behind me answered the question for her. And she looked it around and she said, "Dad, shut up." And my eyes popped out of my head. And in my mind, I said, "Little girl, you need a spank." But I don't spank. But I was amazed that dad lived. And then he said, "I'm sorry I made you so upset that you felt you needed to talk to me that way." Talk about that. What did that dad do right? What did he do wrong?
Well, what he did right was he didn't react and become angry, and he didn't treat her in a way that she needed to fear him, or that he could yell and scream at her and treat her that way, but she's not allowed to treat him that way. So in terms of doing things right, he remained calm fine, great. Things that I would do differently, there have to be boundaries around respect from child to parent and parent to child. And I don't think it's right for a child to say shut up to their parent. I don't think it's right for a parent to say shut up to a child. And I think we really have to look at that, and we have to role model that. And there needs to be a discussion. Now, maybe that discussion is in that moment. Unfortunately, that's not kind. We can talk about it later. And he doesn't need to talk about it in front of you and embarrass her in front of you. But there does need to be a discussion around that. And there need to be boundaries. Boundaries create, like you said, safety. But every relationship in the world needs a guide, a teacher, and a leader, and especially for kids. And if we are letting kids say shut up to people, and we're letting kids, think that that's okay, we're doing them a really big disservice, in my opinion, not teaching them how to actually express their feelings in a respectful way, because she can have her feelings and she can be irritated that he interrupted her, but she needs to have guidance on how she can express that in a respectful way.
Mm-hmm. Should she have been reprimanded after they left my office?
So, you know what? I always hesitate on the word reprimand, because I really am under that discipline umbrella. And I really think what I say to parents is, the first time you see a behavior, no matter what, the first time you see it, that's information for you. So where we fall into punishment is in that moment. If we use that as an example, she does that, they leave the office, and he says, that's it, you're grounded, no video games this week, no TV tonight, whatever it is. And he takes something away, anything he wants to take away, because he didn't like what she did. He now has all the power. That's where you're really going to see strong-willed kids push back to the nth degree. So we really have to be careful of that. So we use it as information. So if that's the first time, let's say for this instance, that she said shut up to him, then he would need to have a conversation with her and figure out what are his boundaries about using inappropriate words or hurtful words or disrespectful language. Really go through and teach and train to her what can be done and what shouldn't be done, and then have the consequence for next time. So from now on, when you choose to use those words and say those words to people, this is going to be the consequence for choosing those words for next time. Otherwise, we're never giving kids the control or the power or the ability to do better. We're just saying, you did wrong, you need to be punished. You did wrong, you need to be punished. Instead, hey, you know what? That's not okay. Going forward, this is what we need to see. And when I do see that behavior, this is what's going to happen. Now they have the power and the control to do what's appropriate and like the outcome, or do what's inappropriate and not like the outcome. That's how you get to a place where your kids will do better the next time and actually build trust in you and your relationship.
It's interesting. Often when I see this, when you tell a child not to do something or it's unacceptable, they turn around and do the exact same thing over and over and over again to see what you're going to do. So say it was, say she'd done it, that was the 10th time she's done it. Should she have consequences, and what should the consequences look like?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say the 10th time for sure. I'd say one time is information, and then we set our boundaries. So parents get stuck saying boundaries. That's where the 10th time would come in. I told you not to do that. That's not okay. Knock it off. Don't do that. Don't say that. And we're just saying things over and over and over. Saying boundaries won't work. We actually need to set boundaries. And so to set boundaries, you need 3 steps. You first need to identify what your expectations and boundaries are. A lot of times we think we know them. They kind of live in our head. And then we expect our kids to know without us actually tabling it and teaching it. So really identifying what your boundaries are. So in this case, saying shut up, or in a rude tone or in not a rude tone, the word shut up is not acceptable. So from now on, that's not a word we use when we're speaking to somebody. So that would be your expectation and your boundary. And then step 2, we need to do what I call TTP, teach, train, and practice. So you would sit down with your kids and you would make sure for younger kids, maybe you've got a list of words that are unacceptable. Maybe you've got a little chart that they can refer to. Maybe you're gonna go through and you're gonna role model that. Let's say, what could we say if we're feeling frustrated? What shouldn't we say? Let's practice it. You do it incorrectly and have them correct you and say, no, not that word, mommy. Instead, we need to use one of these words. So you need to actually teach and train and practice your boundary. And then step 3, what would be your follow through? So your follow through might be when you choose to use those words, you're telling me that you're having a really hard time managing your body. And so we're a little, so when we're having a hard time managing our body, you're telling me that you're tired and we need to get to bed earlier. Or you're telling me that you need to go into the washroom and use inappropriate words by yourself because being out here, these words are not words that we're using. There's a variety of things you can do depending on age, stage, development, and what the actual situation is. So coming up with consequences is something that takes time for parents to learn how to do. But we do need to have a plan in place, or you will be stuck hearing her say it 10 times, which will only frustrate you more, and you'll get stuck trying to force her to stop, which won't work.
What about the 16-year-old who continually says, shut up to mom and dad?
Yeah. So what I say to parents is what we talked about in the beginning. Why? Why is the child so angry? Why is the child saying shut up? Are you overpowering your kids? Are they overpowering you? Do you not have your systems in place? And so one of the things that we do with parents is we use a tool that I developed known as the Behavior Needs Roadmap. And this is a roadmap that identifies all of your kids' needs. Kids have basic needs of sleep, nutrition and meal times, security and transitions. They have emotional needs of power and attention. And they have their lifetime goals, which are linked to our skills. So their goal to please you and push boundaries until they're found, which links to our parenting skills, which is to set concrete, clear, consistent boundaries and follow through with discipline and not punishment. If any of these areas on this roadmap are not met, your kids are acting out, trying to get these needs met. That's why parenting is such an important skill to learn to set our kids up for success. So if your kids are overtired, they're battling you at meal times, they're picky eating, your boundaries are gray, you're punishing, you're taking their phones away, you're constantly forcing your teenagers, everything's just this negative cycle, they're not going to listen to you. Mm-hmm. They're not going to do. So you're going to live in this cycle until you say, I need to overhaul. I need to figure out why my kids are acting out, what needs are met, where are the gaps in my parenting, and how can I adjust this myself to adjust my child's behavior. It isn't the 16-year-old's responsibility if we haven't been parenting in a way that set them up for success.
So if the 16-year-old is saying shut up repeatedly, what you're saying is somewhere along the way, the parents allowed things to get into a negative cycle, and then things got things escalated. So at that point, because I see this quite a lot, the parents of the 16-year-old should say, wait a minute, rather than focus on the kid's behavior, to ask the question, why is the child acting that out, and how can I respond differently to it? Mm-hmm. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. And this is the thing. We look at our kids' behavior and we're stuck on the surface. And we see that behavior and we don't like it and we just want it to stop. And it's not that I don't want the behaviors to stop, because I have 16-year-old son and he wouldn't ever tell me to shut up and I wouldn't want him to be doing those things. But we've got to do the proactive work. So when we look at really positive parenting and effective parenting, I'd say 90% of your work is proactive parenting, getting things set up for success. And then 10% is that response period where there's going to be an issue and we need to deal with it because nobody's perfect and kids are growing and they're pushing the limits and they're trying to test the waters, and that's normal. But we have to know how to handle that in an effective way. And so I would encourage anybody who's listening that if you are stuck in a cycle, especially with teenagers, that's very negative, you most likely, when you reflect, had the same cycles as toddlers, and it's just continued to grow as it's going on. They were either pushing the limits and didn't want to leave the park and you didn't know how to handle it, or they were getting in and out of bed 92 times, or they wouldn't get off their device, or they wouldn't do their homework, and now they're frustrated. And it all, problems don't go away. unless we resolve them. They just change form and actually escalate as the kids grow.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's more than a discipline issue. And I often tell parents that, we always come into parenting with a preload. There's these things that we experienced as kids with our parents that are going to have a big effect on us when we parent our own kids. But a lot of times discipline isn't really discipline, what parents are doing. There could be depression or anxiety. There could be trauma. And how do you talk to parents about seeking more care, either for them or for their kids? Because you recognize, wait a minute, this isn't all coming together here. There's something deeper going on either with the kid or the parent. How do you approach that with a parent?
Yeah. So that tool, the behavior needs roadmap that we talked about, is like your gold ticket or coin to figure out when you need further support, if you need further support, and what's going on. So the parent who has gaps in that roadmap, you've got variables left, right, and center, and you're guessing what's wrong and you're not sure. And so parents similarly will come to me and say, I think my child has ADHD. I think my child has anxiety. I think my child might have oppositional disorder. I think. Well, we want to know.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are stuck, yelling and reminding and power struggling, and your kids are upset and you're upset and the boundaries are gray and everything's all over the map, and your meal times are full of, empty threats and bribes and rewards with dessert, and everything's just feeling stressful, we don't know what our kids need. So could the anxiety be because of the environment we've created? Could we resolve that as we start to check off our boxes on our roadmap and learn the skills? And so I always say to parents, we've got to do our part first. So we go through, we work with those parents, we check off all those boxes on that roadmap, we resolve all of those issues, and then you have a really clear picture into, hey, my kid's doing so much better here, and here, and things are working well in all these areas. But I still have this gut feeling here that my child needs, more support when we're doing their homework and they really can't focus, or my child seems to be so anxious to be dropped off anywhere or to go into a new social environment. And then you can say, hey, well, maybe a counselor or a psychologist or somebody might be helpful for them. But if you don't know what you need, and we continue to yell and remind and power struggle, and then we say, hey, by the way, you need this extra support, you need to go do all that, we're putting all of the blame on our kids, and we're not doing our part as parents.
If you and I have learned anything in this, parenting coaching, it's that you never help a child alone. You help the team. You help a parent and a child, because the parents really have the answer. We're really training parents as much as training kids, because often parents will say to me, here's my 16-year-old kid, do the best you can, and kind of give her back to me when everything's pretty good. And I say, it doesn't work that way. If you want me to help your child, and I'm not a psychologist, a pediatrician, if you want me to help your child, I need to be working with you too, because you're a unit. And I have a child come in who was locked in a closet for on and off for about 3 years, 6 years old, doesn't talk much, but then was given to an adoptive family, lovely family, working very hard. And this kid acted out, was violent. And even with me, and I've been working with him for a long time, and I know that's an extreme situation. And I know obviously there's mental health issues going on, but this kid's young. Where would you tell the parents to start? Because if we can't help parents in the first few years they have this child, the concern is, and it's a very real concern, is that the parents will throw their hands up and then he'll be in a foster situation. And this is how kids go, foster care to foster care to foster care. Is there hope for that child? And if there's hope, how would you instruct the parents to parent this 6-year-old?
Mm-hmm. That's such a sad situation.
Oh, terrible.
Story. Breaks my heart. And like you said, yeah, the parenting has to be the focus. And for me in my practice, I only work with the parents. I work solely with the parents because they need to build their confidence and they need to feel empowered that they can handle the situations, because kids will always act different for their parents versus teachers or coaches unless the parents have the skills. So once you have the skills as a parent, your kids act the same at school as they do at home. It's not, there isn't this whole idea, and it goes around a lot, is, well, kids come home and they relax and they let loose, and so they're mean and they're disrespectful and they're whatever. It doesn't need to be that way. And once you have things in order, you can actually create a very peaceful home with your kids. In return, in regards to your situation there, that child is so desperate for trust and love and is so afraid for their own well-being because they were so overpowered and controlled. And it's going to take time for that child to build that trust. So I would say the most important thing for that parent, yes, they do need to learn how to discipline in a respectful, calm way so that child isn't triggered and threatened. Of course, we don't want to be using any forms of punishment, but the biggest thing is going to be that connection. That child, you look at all of the scientific studies, and I did a lot of science when in my university years. You have to have connection in order to build that trust. And so that child has never had that. And that's a huge missing piece in their security. So we use a tool called Golden Time, and I'm actually going to offer your listeners a download for this if they would like to access it. But it's, 5 simple ingredients. It takes 10 minutes. And of course, the more you can give, the better. But it's a way to really connect one-on-one and to give that child control and choice on what they want to do, to build their interests, to build your bond, and to really be focused on them and solely on them without your phones and without distractions, so that you can build that bond and that connection. So more than discipline for that child, the bond and the connection is going to be what's number one.
Because I've done a lot of studying on attachment, and I'm sure you have too, in those earliest years. So for this 6-year-old who never really formed strong attachments in the first 3 years of life, can they be built later on in life, or is it, or the parents miss the mark and it's too late?
Well, I guess science is science, and some of it, I guess, we'll never know. But I always say every child deserves whatever we can possibly give them. And I think it's never too late to try, and it's never too late to give that child that opportunity. And again, that child is only 6. And a lot of people have had a lot of horrific things happen to them and really turn their lives around. And I think if that child has the opportunity to have a set of parents or a parent who is willing to try, I would not give up on that child.
I love it. That's exactly what I say. It's never, ever, ever too late, because, you and I see people in their 30s and their 40s and their 50s still aching for their parents' approval and connection. And Dad, will you finally say I'm okay and I'm good enough? And that goes on for years and years and years.
And I think our depression and anxiety in our generation for sure stems from that, because we're not worthy unless we've succeeded, or we're not worthy unless our parents have told us we are, because we never had that true connection and bond to build internal drive and internal worthiness.
Well, and that's why parents today are so lucky to have people like you out there and, talking about building those connections. And here's where you start. If you never had this, okay. And a lot of parents who are parenting their kids right now, who have a 12-year-old, an 18-year-old, they never had that connection. So if you don't have it with your own child, be about the business of starting to figure out how to form a connection now. Break that cycle. And once you learn to connect with your child and your child connect with you, guess what? Your life is a whole lot more fun. One word of encouragement that is the most important parenting advice tip you would have, not just for all parents, but particularly for the single moms out there.
I would just say, it isn't that you aren't enough. And I think that single parents sometimes feel like they're not enough and their kids aren't going to have enough, and it's not the right emotional, level, and they're without, and they're not. And I think that if you are a single parent and you are doing your best, then that is enough, and it is enough for you and it is enough for your child. And just to not compare yourself to others, because I'm a parenting coach, and I was raised by a single mom, and I have two boys, and I happen to be married, and there isn't a right or wrong in terms of what your child is being raised, and whether it's a single home or a home with two parents.
Tia, this has been great. I sure appreciate all the work that you've done. If our listening audience wants to get hold of you or wants to get that download you talked about earlier, how can they find you?
My Instagram name is Tia, Tia Parenting Coach. And just DM us the word Meg. That'll be easy. You'll know that you found us from this amazing podcast.
Tia, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Many professionals invest in an executive coach for personal development and a trainer for physical fitness. Now, you can hire me, a best-selling author and expert coach, to help you raise great kids. I've over 35 years practicing pediatrics and an extensive experience decoding what your kids need and think about you. I've helped countless parents just like you. You can talk directly with me through private or group coaching. I'll listen and provide a customized plan to help you be the best dad you can be. Sign up now through the link in the episode notes. Your kids are counting on you. Let's make your family's future brighter together.